It was an overcast and dull Saturday afternoon when I was attacked. I was 12 years old at the time, and despite the threat of rain, we took to the streets as my friends and I usually did on the weekends. The neighborhood always seemed safe, and looking back, it was a wonderful place to grow up, living in the vibrant shadow of the city center, while the parks and quiet streets of our suburb provided plenty of places to explore. That day it was my two friends Andy and Stuart who had knocked on my door asking if I wanted to head out for a while on our bikes. The three of us lived on the same street, and for that reason, we had been as thick as thieves since we were little. We took to the pavements at first in plain sight of our parents, before turning a corner and showing off to one another on the roads, pulling wheelies and unimpressive bunny hops as most kids that age often do. I say most kids, as I was pretty timid at the time, and while I loved hanging out with my friends, I never had the same sense of abandonment or recklessness that they had thrived on. They would quite happily bomb down the highest, steepest hills without a care in the world, while I would stutter behind, scuffing my feet on the ground to slow down my descent. After buying some candy, chocolate, and a packet of trading cards complete with a cheap and brittle bubble gum from the local convenience store, we intended to head to King's Drift, one of the favorite places to ride about on our bikes. But just as we exited the shop, Stuart noticed someone from his class. His name was Ricky, and he had moved to our school the year previously. We didn't know him all that well, but we hung out with him once or twice before. Stuart walked over and struck up a conversation with him for a few minutes before coming back over and picking up his bike. We turned to leave, but there was something that bothered me about that boy Ricky. He seemed lost somehow. Stuart said that he was waiting on his mom coming out of the shop, but I could see that look in his eyes, a look that I had worn many times myself. It simply said, "I want to hang out with you guys." We all got on our bikes, and just as we left, I shouted over to him, "Ricky, do you know King's Drift?" "Yeah, I do," he replied. "We'll be there for the next few hours," I said. "Why don't you get your bike and come meet us after you've helped your mom?" Ricky seemed really happy he was asked, and while he wasn't certain how long he would be, he said that he would meet us at some point later in the afternoon. It was always rough for a new kid to find friends, so we said goodbye, carrying our provisions from the store in stuffed pockets, and cycled off towards our destination. King's Drift was where we were heading, and I could not wait to get there. It was perfect. The street was long and straight, the road surface was uncommonly smooth, and it led to a dead end that resulted in little traffic. We could ride up and down all day without being disturbed, except on a few occasions when one of the grown-ups who lived there would get tired of us hanging around or sneaking into the gardens, playing tag or manhunt. But for the most part, that long secluded street was a fantastic place to get away from the rules and complaining adults, yet only 10 minutes away from our homes should we need to split. We weren't a gang or anything even close to it, but that place was ours, and while many of the other kids in the neighborhood hung around the park or the mall, we quite happily hung on to the perfect stretch of road that no one could take away from us. Tearing up and down the streets, cycling as fast as we could, Andy enjoyed showing off, pedaling quickly while putting both of his hands behind his head, as if relaxing on a sun lounger. Stuart was no slouch himself. He would dart about off the curb and back on again, occasionally mimicking the voice of someone on TV, usually a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle or whatever he was into at the moment. We'd been on that street 100 times before. We had no reason to believe it would be anything but fun. But I guess I should have known better. The clouds knitted together tightly above, brooding menacingly, but the afternoon was not over yet as we continued to play and enjoy our patch. After receiving an earful from one of the women who had hated us sitting on her garden wall, we finally trapezed along the street with our bikes by our side, cursing the woman under our breaths. A loud crash bellowed from the clouds above, and the hazed smell of ozone climbed up through the air. When I was a kid, thunderstorms always held a real fascination for me, and to this day they still do, but no matter how much I understand why it happens, when the sky opens up and a torrid, torrential downpour threatens to drown us all, it seems pretty surreal to me, almost unearthly. The rain streamed down in thick sheets, and within a minute a thin layer of water began to flow along the street into the drains on either side. The complaining woman ran indoors quickly, her anger at us soon replaced by the desire to avoid being drenched. The noise of millions of raindrops smashing on the parked cars and concrete around us became deafening. We were instantly soaked to the bone. It was clear that day was over, and while Andy seemed keen to stay and pull a variety of skidding stunts in water that was accumulating on the road, Stuart just laughed, challenging us both to race home. And off he sped at a rate that I could never hope to equal, the water spraying out from under his wheels. And Andy followed instantly, damned sure that he wouldn't be beaten. I shouted about the new boy, Ricky, and how we were supposed to stay and meet him, but Andy and Stuart were too engaged in their competition. The crescendo of thumping water was now deafening, and as both my friends pulled away into the distance, I clumsily climbed aboard my bike and pedaled as fast as I could. With each panting breath, the rain fell harder and harder until it streamed at such a rate down my face that I could barely see ahead. I shivered in the increasing cold, and as I continued on, I could no longer tell if my friends were near or far. I cannot explain the feeling I had in that moment. Perhaps it's hindsight that has bound it to my memory, but there, in that horrid downpour, I felt isolated. Anyone with any sense would have run for cover and locked themselves happily away inside their house, and at the speed my friends had darted away at, I was sure that by then they must have at least left the street or reached the end of it. But then, a strange, intense feeling of fear drove me on, because for me, King's Drift may have appeared remote and isolated in the blinding rain, but it did not feel empty. In my panic, my wild pedaling shook the bike from side to side, and just as I lifted one hand from the handlebars to wipe the rain from my eyes, something walked out from between two parked cars right in front of me. I swerved, squeezed the brakes, and as the bike screeched to a halt, I was thrown forward, tumbling onto the ground, smashing my face and jaw onto the road. The rain poured into my mouth, carrying with it the metallic taste of my own blood. I let out a cry as I reached out with my tongue to feel nothing but exposed gum and broken shards of teeth that were surely sprayed across the ground. My injuries left me confused and disoriented, but as I screamed out for my friends, it became clear that no one could hear me over the immense roar of the rain. Then the sky darkened, and the strange, alarming sensation that I was not alone proved correct. Someone was standing over me. A combination of tears, blood, and rain stung my eyes, and while I couldn't make out his face, I could tell it was a man. He was broad and stocky, wearing denims and a dark brown coat, and while he wasn't exceptionally tall, his rain-battered frame gave the impression of immense strength. Despite the rain, despite the shock at losing my teeth and cracking my head open, every fiber of my being told me to run, to get away. But I couldn't. With the first movement of my leg, the man pressed his foot down on top of my knee with such force that bursts of excruciating pain shot up through my body. My screams of both agony and terror were drowned out by the still falling torrential rain. Why was he doing this to me? A grown man? He leaned over and grabbed my bleeding head by the hair, yanking me forcefully upwards. No one can know the feeling of an adult exerting their full strength upon a child unless you've been through it. The fear, the utter helplessness, the feeling of resentment and betrayal that a person who should protect but instead harms and hurts. No matter how much I struggled, no matter how much I flailed, my puny 12-year-old body could provide no amount of strength to free me from his foul, overpowering grip. But a bike thrown as hard as possible by two dear friends square at his face was more than enough to make him stumble backwards, causing him to slip in the rain and batter his back and body against the solid street surface. My friends had not left the street. They had seen the vague shape attacking me through the sheets of rain and had cycled back to defend me. As the man staggered to his feet once more, Andy and Stuart grabbed me by the arms and forced me to run as fast as I ever had done, leaving my bike behind. We dared not look back for fear of our pursuer being close. We panted and heaved, and as the adrenaline surged through my veins, I forgot my injuries for a moment and fled as quickly as any child ever has. As we reached the end of King's Drift, Andy and Stuart ran out around the corner without looking back. But not me, for curiosity has always been my vice, and perhaps my punishment. The rain calmed for a moment, easing off to nothing but a few subtle droplets, and as I squinted through blood and tears, I saw at the end of the road the brutal figure of a man who had attacked me, disappearing forever out of sight with the bloody, motionless body of poor Ricky over his shoulder. Be sure to tune in every Monday, Wednesday, and Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for brand new content from me. And remember to follow me on Discord and Twitch, as well as my team who make these videos possible. You'll find all of their respective links in the description below this video. Thanks for watching.